On the night of my 65th birthday, my son-in-law stood at the head of my own dinner table, held up his wineglass, and announced to 14 guests that it was time for the old man to find somewhere else to be a burden. Then he slid a cardboard box across the tablecloth toward me, the kind you'd use to pack up an office desk, and told me I had until Sunday to clear out my belongings from the spare bedroom. My daughter laughed. That was the part I couldn't unhear. Even weeks later. Not his words. Hers. I'd been a structural engineer for 38 years. I built bridges, calculated load tolerances, designed foundations that had to hold for a century. I understood, better than most people, what happens when you ignore the early signs of stress fractures. You don't notice them until the whole structure comes down. Standing at that dinner table with that empty cardboard box sitting in front of me and 14 people pretending not to look, I understood that I had been ignoring stress fractures in my own family for 3 years. Starting that night, I was done ignoring them. Let me go back to the beginning, because the beginning matters. My wife, Patricia, passed away from a stroke 4 years ago, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. She was 61 years old. We had been married for 39 years, and I am not a man who does well alone. Patricia was the one who kept the house warm, kept the calendar organized, kept our daughter and me from drifting into the silence that men and daughters sometimes fall into when they don't know how to talk to each other. When she died, my daughter called me every day for the first month, then every few days, then once a week, then less. About a year after Patricia's funeral, my daughter and her husband hit what she described as a rough patch. Their landlord was selling the building. They needed somewhere to stay while they looked for a new place. 3 months, she said. Maybe 4. My house in Scottsdale had 4 bedrooms. Patricia and I had bought it in 1998, paid it off in 2019. My name alone was on the deed because Patricia had been old-fashioned about certain things, and we'd never gotten around to changing it after she passed. The house was worth somewhere around $680,000 by the time my daughter asked if she and her husband could stay. I said yes without hesitating. She was my daughter. Patricia would have wanted me to say yes. That was 3 years ago. In those 3 years, my son-in-law contributed exactly $0 toward household expenses. No rent, no utilities, no groceries, nothing. He had a job in sales, good months and bad months, he always said, and my daughter worked part-time at a dental office. They weren't broke. They went to Sedona for a long weekend in March. They bought a new sectional couch that they put in my living room without asking. They replaced my daughter's car with a lease. They ordered delivery food 4 nights a week, charged to a card I had made the mistake of giving my daughter for household emergencies 2 years before Patricia died. I was eating peanut butter sandwiches and watching my savings account drain while my son-in-law ate sushi in my living room on my couch watching my television. But I didn't say anything. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself this was what Patricia would have done. I told myself that pushing back would damage my relationship with my daughter, and she was all I had left. The stress fractures were there the whole time. I just kept looking away. The birthday dinner was my daughter's idea, she said. She'd invited her husband's parents, his sister and her boyfriend, 2 couples from their social circle, a neighbor I barely knew, and her friend from the dental office. 14 people in my dining room, eating food I had paid for. At a table Patricia and I had bought together at an estate sale in 2001, under a chandelier I had installed myself the summer our daughter turned 10. I was not asked what I wanted for my birthday. I was not asked if I wanted a party at all. I came downstairs at 6:30 to find my house full of strangers and my son-in-law standing at the head of the table, my chair, the one I sat in every night pouring wine and telling a story about a golf trip with his friends. I stood in the doorway for a moment before anyone noticed me. When my son-in-law finally looked up, something crossed his face that I had been pretending not to see for 3 years. Not embarrassment, not warmth, not even basic acknowledgement. Mild inconvenience. The way you look at a delivery notification that arrived at a bad time. "Hey," he said. "Birthday boy's here." A few guests turned and offered thin smiles. My daughter waved from across the table without getting up. I found a seat near the end. Not the head. Not my chair. Just an open spot someone had left between his sister and a couple whose names I didn't know. I sat down. Someone handed me a plate already served. I hadn't been asked about portions. My son-in-law had apparently decided what I would eat at my own birthday dinner. For 40 minutes I sat there quietly while conversations happened around me. Nobody addressed me directly. His parents talked about a cruise. His sister's boyfriend talked about a startup. My daughter talked about a wellness retreat she wanted to book. I heard prices mentioned. Large ones. I picked up my fork and ate the food someone else had decided I would eat, and tried to remember why I had believed, for 3 years, that patience was the same thing as love. Then my son-in-law stood up and tapped his fork against his glass. He made a toast. He said it had been wonderful having use of the house. His exact words, and that it had been a real gift, while they got back on their feet. Then he paused, tilted his head at me in a way that looked affectionate from across the table but wasn't, and said that the time had come for everyone to be honest about what the living arrangement was and wasn't working. He said he and my daughter had talked about it, and they felt it would be best for everyone if I transitioned to something more suitable for my stage of life. An independent living community, maybe. Or with a friend. He slid the cardboard box across the table while he was still smiling. Something more suitable for my stage of life. In my house. At my table. On my birthday. In front of 14 people. My daughter said, "Dad, don't make it a thing." Her voice was gentle the way a brush-off is gentle. I looked at the box. I looked at my son-in-law. Still standing. Still holding his wine glass. With that particular posture of a man who has just done something he's very pleased with. I looked at my daughter. She was looking at her plate. I picked up my napkin, set it beside my fork, pushed my chair back, and stood up. "I want to be clear about something," I said, and the table went quiet in a way that felt different from comfortable quiet. "My house. My name on the deed. I'll be upstairs." I walked to the stairs. I heard my son-in-law say something behind me in a lowered voice, and a few people laugh, but I didn't turn around. I climbed the stairs one at a time and went to my bedroom. I did not cry. I am 65 years old and I have buried a wife and built bridges that are still standing, and I did not cry. I sat at my desk in the chair Patricia had picked out at a furniture store in Tempe 20 years ago, and I opened my laptop, and I began. I am a structural engineer. I think in load tolerances and failure points. The first thing you do when a structure is failing is assess what you're actually working with. So I opened a spreadsheet, and I started from the beginning. Property taxes over 3 years, paid entirely by me, $19,200. Homeowners insurance, $4,350. Utilities, electric, water, gas, internet, my accounts, my payments, zero contribution from them. $11,400. Groceries, household supplies, cleaning products, toiletries they used freely. $14,750. The card I'd given my daughter for household emergencies had been used for a Sedona weekend. The new couch, 2 spa appointments, a wine club subscription, her husband's golf equipment, 3 weekend trips, and a considerable number of restaurant meals. Total unauthorized charges, $22,640. Grand total I had supported them over 36 months, $72,340. I saved the file as household, ledger, 2021-2024, XLSX, and closed the laptop. Below me, the party continued. Music, laughter, the sound of my good dishes being stacked carelessly. I sat in my desk chair and thought about Patricia. She had been sharper than me about people. Always. She had met my son-in-law twice before she died, and both times, in the car ride home, she had said something careful and precise that I hadn't wanted to hear. "He's very charming," she'd said after the second time, which from Patricia meant the opposite of a compliment. I thought about what she would say right now. Probably the same thing she always said when I stayed quiet too long about something that mattered. "Arthur," she'd say, "stop calculating. and start acting. So I acted. At 7 the next morning, I called my bank. I removed my daughter from the emergency credit card and changed the account password. I called the second card a backup I'd set up 3 years ago and forgotten, and discovered she'd found it somehow and had a current balance of $3,400 on purchases I hadn't authorized. I reported it as unauthorized use and had the card canceled. Then I called an estate attorney, whose name I'd gotten years ago from a colleague, and left a message asking for an appointment as early as possible. The estate attorney called back by 9. She had an opening at 2 that afternoon. My daughter knocked on my bedroom door at 9:30. "Dad, can we talk?" Her voice was the same gentle brush-off as the night before, the one that sounded like care but was actually management. "I'll be out this afternoon," I said through the door. The estate attorney's office was in a building off Camelback Road. Clean, organized, the kind of office that makes you feel like whatever problem you walked in with can be solved if you just lay out the facts. Her name was Ellen Marsh, 50-something, precise, unhurried. I laid out the facts. The house, the deed, the 3 years, the birthday dinner, the cardboard box, the spreadsheet. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked 2 questions. First, any written lease or rental agreement? No. Second, had I ever told them they could stay permanently? Never in writing, and not verbally as a permanent arrangement, only as a temporary one that never ended. Then it's straightforward on the property side, she said. Arizona is favorable to property owners in unlicensed occupancy situations. You never created a landlord-tenant relationship. You can revoke their right to occupy with proper written notice. She paused. 30 days is standard to demonstrate good faith. If they refuse to leave, you file for forcible entry and detainer. The process takes 4 to 6 weeks after that. I asked her to draft the notice. While she typed, I told her about the credit card, the unauthorized charges, the canceled card, and the $3,400 balance I hadn't known about. "That changes things," she said, without looking up from her keyboard. She asked me a few more questions. When had my daughter been added to the account? Had I ever set a limit? Had I ever explicitly authorized the purchases that showed up? I pulled up the spreadsheet on my phone. I had dates and amounts for everything. Ellen Marsh looked at the screen for a moment and said, "You've been keeping records the whole time. I'm an engineer. I document everything." She smiled in a way that wasn't quite a smile. "That's going to be very useful." I was home by 5. The house was quiet. A note on the kitchen counter in my daughter's handwriting. Gone to dinner. Back later. She'd used the card that was now canceled to try to pay, I assumed. I wondered which restaurant. That evening I sat on the back patio with a glass of water and watched the sun go down over the desert. My neighbor from 2 houses down, Bill Kowalski, was walking his dog along the back fence line. He stopped when he saw me. "Haven't seen you outside in a while," he said. "Been a long few years," I said. He nodded like that, explained everything. Which it did. He'd known Patricia. He'd known me before. He'd watched the last 3 years from the other side of the fence without asking questions, the way good neighbors do. "You doing all right, Arthur?" "Working on it," I said. He nodded again and walked on. His dog looked back at me once. That night I slept better than I had in months. The card stopped working the next morning. I know this because my son-in-law appeared at my bedroom door at 9:15, his voice carrying the particular quality of a man who is trying to sound calm while being anything but. He said there was a problem with the card. He said my daughter had tried to pick up a few things, and it wasn't going through. He said it was probably a bank error. I looked at him. I had been looking at him for 3 years, without really looking. He was younger than my daughter by 4 years. Good-looking in a way that relied on a certain confidence, the kind that works well until it doesn't. "No bank error," I said. I removed the cards, both of them. His expression shifted. The charm turned off like a switch. "You can't do that." She was authorized. "Authorization can be removed," I said. I suggest you two discuss your budget. The cards won't be reinstated." He stood there for a moment. I could see him deciding how to play it. Anger. Reason. Appeal to family loyalty. He chose reason, which told me he was more worried than he wanted to show. "Look," he said, "I get that last night was maybe not handled perfectly, but we have expenses. We have obligations." "So do I," I said. "For 36 months, I've covered all of them alone. That ends now." He left without slamming the door, which surprised me. I heard him downstairs on the phone, voice low, words I couldn't make out. By the afternoon, my daughter knocked. Her voice was different from her husband's, softer, and underneath the softness was something that sounded almost like the girl who used to sit with me on this same back patio when she was 12 and ask me how bridges didn't fall down. "Dad, can we please talk?" I opened the door. She stood in the hallway looking like she hadn't slept, which was probably true. I sat down at my desk. She stood. I let her talk first. She said she knew last night had been insensitive. She said her husband had meant it as a practical conversation, not an attack. She said they were under a lot of stress, and he hadn't handled it well. She said she was sorry. "I want to believe that," I said. "But you laughed." She looked away. I didn't say it to hurt her. I said it because it was the fact I kept returning to, the one that had more weight than everything else. Not what her husband did, what she did. She had sat at that table and she had laughed, while her father held a cardboard box meant for his own belongings. "Mom never would have let it get this far," she said quietly. "No," I said. "She wouldn't have. And she would have told you that a long time ago." My daughter pressed her fingers to her eyes. She was 40 years old. She looked younger right now than she had in years. I thought about Patricia sitting in the car after that second dinner, choosing her words carefully. "You're not really going to make us leave," she said. It wasn't a question. It was the statement of someone who has always believed, at bottom, that consequences are for other people. Ellen Marsh delivered the notice 2 days later, by process server and certified mail simultaneously. I made sure I was downstairs when the process server knocked so there could be no later claim of confusion. My son-in-law read the first paragraph and went very still. "What is this?" he said. 30-day notice to vacate," I said. Ellen Marsh's letterhead is at the top. Her contact information is on the second page. He looked up from the paper. His voice was precise and cold. "You hired a lawyer against your own family." "Against my family," I said, "who threw a cardboard box across my birthday table and told me to leave my own house." My daughter had been standing behind him. She stepped forward and took her copy of the notice. I watched her eyes move down the page. "Dad," she said, "you don't have to do this. We can work something out. I've absorbed $72,000 in expenses over 3 years," I said. "I have the spreadsheet. I have every bank statement, every credit card charge, every utility bill. I'm an engineer. I document everything." "That's not family," my son-in-law said. "That's an audit." "It's both," I said, and went back upstairs. The campaign started the next day. His mother called. His sister called. My daughter called Patricia's sister. My sister-in-law in Albuquerque, who then called me with the particular tone of someone who believes they are mediating when they are actually being used. I told my sister-in-law the full story. The 3 years. The $72,000. The birthday dinner. The box. My daughter's laugh. There was a long silence on the line. She said, "I had no idea it had gotten that bad." "Neither did I," I said. "Not until I added it up." She didn't push me to reconsider. She said, "Patricia would be furious." Then she said, "Patricia would also tell you that you already know what to do. So do it." I was reviewing documents at my desk 4 days after the notice was served when I found something that made me sit back in my chair and stare at the wall for a full minute before I could process it. I had been reviewing my credit file, something I did every year as a habit, part of the same discipline that had kept detailed records of every household expense. And I found a hard inquiry from a bank I had not contacted, dated 7 months ago. An application for a home equity line of credit in my name. I had not applied for a home equity line of credit. I called the bank immediately. The application had been submitted online. It had been denied, my credit was clean, and the debt-to-income ratio had flagged something irregular in the application. But the inquiry was there, and the application data existed. Social Security number, property address, estimated property value, requested line amount, $150,000. $150,000 against my house. I called Ellen Marsh. "This is serious," she said when I finished. "This isn't a civil matter anymore. This is attempted financial fraud, possibly identity theft, depending on what they used to file the application." "I want to know exactly what was submitted," I said. She told me how to file for the full application details through the bank's fraud department. I called them that afternoon. The application had been submitted from an IP address registered to my home internet network. The personal information used was mine in full date of birth, Social Security number, employment history, property records, information that someone would only have if they lived in my house and had access to my files. My filing cabinet in the home office, the one I'd kept locked, but which I had noticed once, maybe 6 months ago, looked slightly different than I remembered. The lock scratched in a way that suggested it had been picked or forced had been accessed. I called the police that evening. A detective came the following morning, took my statement, reviewed the documentation I had already organized, and told me, in the careful language detectives use, that what I was describing was consistent with elder financial abuse, and that the case would be referred to the Financial Crimes Unit. He was young, maybe 30. And he had a look on his face during the interview that I recognized. The same look people get when they hear a story and they're trying to decide whether to say the thing they're thinking. At the end, he said it. "Mr. Calloway, I see cases like this more often than I'd like. What you did, keeping records, acting quickly, getting legal counsel, most people in your situation don't do that. Most people are too ashamed to report their own family. You did everything right." I thanked him and showed him to the door. That night I sat in Patricia's chair, the armchair in the bedroom that had been hers, the one I rarely sat in because it still felt like it belonged to her, and I thought about the last 3 years. The patience I'd told myself was love. The quiet I'd told myself was keeping the peace. The $72,000 I'd told myself was temporary. The laugh I'd tried to unhear. My daughter had not spoken to me in 4 days. She and her husband left early each morning and returned late, and when they were home, they stayed in their room. Through the wall, I sometimes heard voices, urgent and low, the sound of 2 people trying to figure out an exit strategy that didn't exist. I sent them both an email through Ellen Marsh's office. The subject line was, "Financial Fraud Investigation, Your Options." In the body, I laid it out clearly, the way I would lay out load calculations for a client. There were 3 options. Option 1. I press full charges for the attempted HELOC fraud and unauthorized credit card use, and the Financial Crimes Unit proceeds with its investigation. Option 2. You sign a restitution agreement for $75,740. The $72,000 in household expenses, plus the $3,400 in unauthorized card charges, plus legal fees payable at $600 per month, beginning 60 days after a signed agreement. Any missed payment triggers Option 1 automatically. Option 3. You vacate the premises by the notice deadline, return all house keys, and I reserve the right to pursue Option 1 at any time within the statute of limitations. I copied Ellen Marsh. I hit send. 14 minutes later, through the wall, I heard my son-in-law's voice, loud for the first time in days. He wasn't loud in the direction of me. He was loud in the direction of my daughter. Their voices overlapped and tangled, and then went quiet again. I went to bed and slept through the night. My daughter came to my door the next morning. She knocked the way she used to when she was a teenager, asking to borrow the car, hopeful and braced simultaneously. I opened the door. She had been crying, or was about to. Her husband was not with her. "Dad," she said, "I need to talk to you without him here." I stepped aside. She came in and sat in Patricia's chair without thinking. and then caught herself and started to get up. And I said, "You can sit there. It's just a chair." She settled back into it and looked at her hands. "There are things I need to say," she said. "And I don't know if it changes anything, but I need to say them." He sat at me desk and listened. She talked for 20 minutes. About the year after Patricia died, the way grief had made her contract inward and push away the people who needed her. About marrying someone who was exciting at first and became consuming later, who made her feel like his priorities were the only priorities. About watching, from inside the arrangement, as the dynamic in this house shifted, and knowing it was wrong and not knowing how to stop it. About the birthday dinner, about the box and the laugh she couldn't explain except to say that she had been laughing from anxiety, from not knowing what else to do, from the particular paralysis of being married to someone who commands a room and having lost the habit of speaking up. She didn't make excuses for him. She made them for herself, which was harder and more honest. "I didn't know you were eating peanut butter sandwiches," she said. "I didn't know it had gotten that bad for you." "You didn't ask," I said. Not unkindly. She pressed her hands to her eyes. "I know. I want you to understand something," I said. "Not the money. Not the legal situation. I need you to understand what it felt like to stand at that table on my birthday. In the house where you grew up. At the table where your mother used to make Sunday dinner. And be handed a box." She was crying now. Not theatrical crying. Just quiet and steady. "I know, Dad. Your mother raised you better than that. I know. I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying it because if I don't say it clearly, then everything else I do is just punishment without meaning. I want you to understand why I'm doing this." She nodded without looking up. When she left the room, she didn't go back to her husband. I heard her in the guest bathroom running water. I heard her in the kitchen making tea. I heard the particular sound of the house settling back into something that was almost, not quite, familiar. I did not rescind the notice. I want to be clear about that. The 30 days stood. Ellen Marsh's letter stood. The police report stood. But I called Ellen that afternoon and told her that my daughter had spoken to me honestly, and that I wanted option 2 structured, so that my daughter's name could be separated from her husband's obligation based on an ability to pay assessment done in good faith. Ellen was quiet for a moment. She said, "You understand she may still be liable jointly." "I understand," I said. "But I want the structure to leave room for her to come back from this." Ellen said she'd think about how to approach it. The notice deadline was a Tuesday. The week before it, a rental truck appeared in my driveway early on a Wednesday morning. I watched through the kitchen window as my son-in-law and 2 of his friends loaded boxes and furniture. He didn't speak to me. He worked quickly, and with the particular efficiency of a man who has accepted a situation and wants to be done with it. My daughter spent most of that day in her old bedroom, her childhood bedroom, the one she'd lived in from age 3 until she left for college, which they hadn't been using. I left her alone. At 4 in the afternoon, my son-in-law knocked on the kitchen door frame. He had his keys in one hand. He didn't look at me the way he used to. The charm switch was off permanently now. What was underneath it was plain. He was not a bad man in the way of stories, the villain kind. He was a small man in the way of ordinary life, someone who had been given easy access to something that wasn't his and had taken it. And it only stopped when the door closed. "I didn't want it to go like this," he said. "Yes, you did," I said. "You wanted the house. You just didn't want the consequences." He set the keys on the counter. The front door and the back door, both labeled in my daughter's handwriting from when they'd moved in, and I'd given her a set. He walked out without another word. My daughter came downstairs at 5. She had her own keys in her hand. She set them next to his on the counter. She stood across the kitchen from me, and we looked at each other in the particular way of parents and children who have hurt each other and know it. "I don't know what happens now," she said. "You get an apartment," I said. "You pay your own rent. You figure out what your marriage is without a safety net under it. And when you're ready, you call me." She nodded. "Can I call you?" "Yes," I said. "That's not the problem. You calling me was never the problem. She cried again at the door. I hugged her, because she was my daughter, and Patricia's daughter, and the hug was real even if the year was hard. I held on for a few seconds longer than she expected. Then she picked up her bag and walked out. I stood in the doorway and watched the rental truck disappear at the end of the street. The desert air in October is clean and dry, and the light comes down at a slant that makes everything look like it's in the last moments before something either ends or begins. I went back inside. I walked through every room. The living room. With the couch they'd brought, I'd have someone take it away. The guest bathroom. Cleaner now than it had been in a year. The kitchen. The back patio. Upstairs, the room they'd used. Door open. Bed stripped to the mattress. The window where Patricia used to put her reading lamp. I ended in my bedroom, at my desk, with my laptop. I opened the household ledger spreadsheet and added a final entry at the bottom. Case resolved, all parties vacated, restitution agreement pending signature. Then I sat with it for a moment, 37 rows of data, 3 years of a life I'd been half living, and I saved it one more time, backed it up to the cloud, and closed the file. Outside, a neighbor was walking a dog. A car passed. The streetlights were coming on. I thought about Patricia. I thought about the Sunday dinners at the table downstairs. I thought about the time she sat across from me at that same table after a difficult year at the firm and said, "Arthur, you are allowed to demand to be treated well. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to earn it from me, and you don't have to earn it from anyone. It's just true." I had carried that for 25 years and never fully believed it. I believed it now. Ellen Marsh called the following week. My son-in-law had agreed to a restitution structure, smaller monthly payments than I'd have liked, and it would take years, but every payment would be documented, and the first missed payment would trigger the fraud referral automatically. He understood that. My daughter had found a studio apartment near her dental office. She called me on a Thursday evening, just to talk. We talked for 40 minutes about nothing important, a documentary she'd watched, a trail she'd hiked, a book she was reading, the kind of nothing that is actually everything. The kind of conversation Patricia used to say was how you keep a relationship alive during the winters. Before she hung up, she said, "I'm going to be better, Dad." "I know," I said. "I mean it. I know you do." On a Saturday morning, about a month after the house was empty again, I drove to the hardware store and bought supplies. I spent the afternoon on the back patio, cleaning the furniture, replacing a hinge on the gate, fixing a drip in the outdoor faucet that had been dripping for 8 months. Small repairs, the kind that pile up when you're not paying attention. Bill Kowalski came by at 4 with 2 bottles of water, the way he used to in the years before Patricia died when we'd talk over the fence on weekends. "Heard the truck the other week," he said. "Different situation now," I said. He handed me a water bottle. "Patricia would be glad," he said. "She talked about you more than you know. She said you were the most patient man she'd ever met, but that someday you were going to stop being patient and then God help the other person." I laughed. I hadn't laughed in a while. It felt like something loosening. We stood there in the late afternoon sun and talked about nothing in particular: his daughter's new job, my neighbor's renovation, the upcoming winter that wouldn't be much of a winter because this was Arizona, and winters here were gentle and clear. After he left, I stood on the patio alone for a while longer. The house behind me was quiet. My house. My name on the deed. My money in the walls. Patricia's handprints in the paint colors she'd chosen. Her reading lamp in the upstairs window. Her chair at my desk. Her memory in every room. For the first time in 3 years, it felt like mine again. I went inside, washed my hands, and started making dinner. Real dinner. Not peanut butter sandwiches, not canned soup. I cooked the way Patricia had taught me, slowly, with the windows open, taking the time to do it right. The smell filled the house the way it used to on Sunday evenings, when we were all younger and life had not yet taught us everything it intended to. I set one place at the table. I sat down. I ate in my own dining room, at my own table, in my own house. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was not waiting for permission to be there.